there's just a lot of stuff in Georgia. It's just filled, like Saint Maximus the Confessor. He was exiled and died in Georgia. His tomb is here. We have the place where Christ's garment was buried is here in Georgia. Saint Nino, recent saint, Saint Gabriel. Like, you throw a rock, you're going to hit an Orthodox sacred place in Georgia. It's amazing.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Orthodox Christian Podcast. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Emmanuel Constantinidis. And for everyone watching or listening, Emmanuel, why don't you take a second to introduce yourself and tell everyone what you spend your time doing?
Hi, I'm Emmanuel Constantinidis. I'm a software engineer. I run a small live streaming company called Entropy. Mostly we have people that are live streaming political podcasts, that sort of thing. A few Orthodox Christians, but mostly politics. And yeah, that's about it.
Okay, well, that's a nice succinct summary. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your religious background, what you were raised with, and how you encountered the Orthodox Church?
Sure. So I was raised evangelical. I'd never been to a liturgical service in my life before I came to an Orthodox church. How I encountered the Orthodox Church is, it's a bit of a boring story. Basically, I'd been church hopping for about a year, given up, and I started reading the Church Fathers for the first time. Was investigating, had been kind of curious because I'd been told growing up that basically there was a period in early church history where the Christian theology was sort of scattered and needed to sort of coalesce around. Was sort of coalescing. And I thought, oh, this sounds like an interesting period of time. So I started studying sort of early heresies and that sort of thing to try and understand that. And I was sort of convinced that, there really has been sort of a central Christian doctrine since basically the time of the apostles. And anyway, I started reading like Saint Irenaeus and Hippolytus of Rome. Both of them had some texts on heresies that I found interesting. And then Justin Martyr. And I was just really impressed. I'd been going to church for my entire life. And I never encountered the wisdom and the deep theology that these guys were presenting. And so I was just really, really impressed. And so I basically, I saw in the little Wikipedia article, it says venerated in Catholic Church and Eastern Orthodox Church. And I said, well, I'm Protestant, so I can never go to a Catholic church. So I just looked up the nearest Orthodox church in my city and attended, basically knowing nothing, never having been to a liturgical service. And I think one of the other funny parts about my first time I attended was the victory over iconoclasm. So they did the procession of the icons, and so coming from an evangelical background, iconography is not a thing. I got roped into doing a procession of the icons on my first time into a service, so that was a lot for me. But yeah, it was good. I kept going, so clearly it wasn't enough to scare me off.
Right. Okay, so about the evangelical background, can you tell us a little bit about that, what that actually looked like in terms of your practice of faith, what it looked like at a church gathering, but also at home?
Well, so, growing up, my parents, my mom especially, had us pray every night, pray before meals. But yeah, as we got older, my mom didn't force us to do that anymore, and I didn't really do it very much after that. But I still pray at meals and that sort of thing. Church is typical evangelical church, sort of a rock concert for the first half, and then a TED talk for the second half. It's a coffee hour, and we'd been we had lived all over the world growing up. So I'd been to Australia, Hong Kong. So, evangelicalism was the same everywhere. um, we had growing up, we had some really great churches we went to, lovely people, but by the time I was looking for my own church uh, in Canada, I think in fact some ways we were kind of spoiled growing up. You know, lots of expatriate communities. There's sort of interesting people that join in expatriate communities, and so yeah, I think some of the churches we had growing up kind of spoiled me for when I came back to Canada, and went to a lot of places and really couldn't find a church that kind of felt like was home for me, which was kind of disappointing for a lot of years.
Okay. Okay. And that was actually the other question I was going to ask was, what was it that caused you to step away from church for a period? Was there something specific that you encountered when you came back to Canada?
Like, well, okay, so first of all, I was sort of, you know, what was I say? I think the biggest thing was I would leave a lot of services very frustrated, usually by the sermon. I always hated the music. They speak about, they speak about Jesus Christ as if, he's their boyfriend in a lot of the songs. And so it's very irreverent. And I think that has always rubbed me the wrong way. As for, the sermons, I grew up, I read my Bible lots. I knew my Bible fairly well. And oftentimes better than people that were speaking as a pastor in the church. They'd say things like, that were clearly not true. Like, like God doesn't punish people. Well, I mean, you could flip open the book. I mean, he punishes people all the time in the Old Testament. You can't just sort of say this and just take this as a given or preach this from the pulpit. I mean, it's very clearly this happens. Things that are sort of not popular but are in the Bible, would get said. And yeah, I don't know, that I would leave a lot of sermons basically frustrated by what was being preached and feeling that it did not conform to what was said in the Bible. And that's really just not, you're supposed to be going to church to get, mentored and taught. To feel like that week after week is a very frustrating experience.
Mm, mm. And so there's the music aspect where you weren't a fan of the direction that it was heading in. And it sounds like
Yeah.
that was something that was going on for quite a while. And then also
Yeah.
just the content of the sermons not
You,
being
you grew up evangelical,
accurate.
didn't you? You grew up
Yes. Yeah.
evangelical, right? Yeah. I mean, like, you remember the music, the classic, the synth pad where everybody's supposed to like the long notes of the synth pad where everyone's supposed to like get really into the song. I even at that point I sort of could get the sense this was like emotional manipulation. This was not like this was not worship in any real sense, and I always sort of, that always bothered me. And yeah, sorry, it was the second part of your question.
No, that's helpful. So you kind of stepped away from it at that point, and then started going to an Orthodox church, which must have been very unusual at first, as you mentioned. The first time you
Yeah.
go, they're processing all these icons, which are very new from what you grew up with. But
Yeah.
were there certain reasons why you decided to switch to the Orthodox Church?
Well, so the reason I became Orthodox, like got baptized, was I wanted to participate in the sacramental life. That was the reason. Um, I had been attending for about a year. I understood sort of clearly that this was, pivotal for my salvation, to be attending or to be participating in the sacraments, and so that was the main motivation for getting baptized. But I get the sense that you're more asking something else.
Well, there's something that was attractive about Orthodoxy. So obviously, you were looking for something, you were on the search for something.
Yeah.
You weren't satisfied with what you were finding in the evangelical setting that you had grown up with. And so you decided to go explore the Orthodox Church. And so I imagine that one way of phrasing it would be you had certain boxes that you were looking to be checked off, more or less. What
Mhm.
was it that you were looking for, and how did Orthodoxy fill that?
Well, so I had basically two boxes to check off. One of them was I've been basically not attending church for about a year, and I knew that that was not right as a Christian. So I knew I had to be attending a church, and the problem was when I tried to do that, I wasn't very happy with it. Box number one was I wanted to be attending a church. Secondly, I I tried to keep an open mind, and so in trying to keep an open mind, I had to think about like what was how should I judge? And I'm church hopping a lot. How should I judge a church? And the metric that I had come up with when I was church hopping was basically like I want to sort of meet a few people, get an idea of whether I think the people there, you know, like when Jesus says, judge a prophet by his fruits. Like what is happening in this church? Like what the like are the people that I meet there? Do they exude like brotherly love and that sort of thing? And so I think when it came to how much like am I doxing anything by like using any specifics, like saying what our old church was or anything like that?
No, no, no. You can be as specific as you want. It's actually probably helpful because then it makes it a little more concrete for people.
Okay. So when we started attending St. Peter's, I was really blown away by like the how everybody, both the priests were just on another level compared to the pastors I had been used to growing up, and the people that were attending the church, they were warm, they were smart, just unbelievably impressed. And so any sort of problems I had, um, like things that sort of were strange to me, could sort of be covered over by these facts. I knew I had to be attending a church, and the people at St. Peter's were just really amazing, and I wanted to be able to be fostered in the same environment that they were in. That was what I wanted.
Okay, okay. So you started going to the church, you're impressed by the people, both in terms of the leadership as well as just the general community, wanted to
Yeah,
keep on going. That was enough to propel you to continue despite some of the apprehensions you may have initially faced. And then just walk us through
yeah.
that journey a little bit from when you first stepped in to um, when you were baptized and even up to the present.
So what like at that point, I don't know why. I had this sort of aversion as a Protestant to reading ancient Christian texts. I think you learn that basically in the early church, that the church was sort of corrupted. And so I had an aversion to reading early Christian texts, thinking like, well, like I'll read something there that will, I think deep down I was worried that I'd read something there that would like make me not want to be Christian anymore. And so I avoided it. Um, and this exhibited itself in a very strange way, which is I felt far more comfortable reading other religions' texts. So I had directly before I started attending the Orthodox Church, I had been reading up on like I'd read up on like the holy books from like Hinduism or from Zoroastrianism or some of the other religions I was interested in. I read a lot of like Second Temple literature. It's sort of a weird thing, like, okay, you're worried about this, so I'm going to start reading a bunch of other religions. So I, I I could say that at that point in my life, I was feeling very open minded. So I had sort of been encountering all this weird stuff from everywhere, and so the fact that I was going to a Christian church that had some stuff I wasn't totally comfortable with was not seeing things that I wasn't used to as a Christian didn't necessarily scare me off because I'm like, well, it's far less weird than other things I've read about. So, that sort of carried me over. As to like, you know, there are other aspects of it as well. Like, I guess at that point I wasn't really super into soul scripture because I was reading Second Temple Jewish texts and sort of relating that to things that were happening in the Bible and going, well, okay, so like clearly there's a connected tradition here that's sort of outside of the scriptures. So I was comfortable with ideas like, okay, well, like our uh, we're letting tradition inform our interpretation of the Bible, and our interpretation of Christian practice. So, that was not really such a big deal. Iconography was pretty easy. Iconography is hard because, in fact, if things like, like idolatry is a really big deal in the Old Testament, especially. They criticize it a lot. And so it's definitely something you want to avoid. And that's sort of at the rational side. Another side, it affects you when you walk into a building, like, most Protestant churches, it's like a big lecture hall, I would say most Protestant evangelical churches, it's like a big lecture hall. When you walk into an Orthodox church, it's a beautiful space, and it does change where your mind goes when you do that. And so it's somewhat like, I don't know, I think that iconography got easier because it just sort of felt right that a place where you're worshiping God should be a beautiful space. And so of course you sort of have, I mean, I think it's a totally reasonable explanation for why these are not, in fact, idols. They're not. They're depictions of saints. Christ. All human beings are in the image of God, so clearly, images of God is not a problem. If God decided that every human being should be an image of God, it's clearly not a problem to have depictions of Christ everywhere. So, all in all, it's totally reasonable as far as I'm concerned. But it is still a bit of a shock, something I had to get over. A veneration of Mary, I think, was probably of everything the hardest, which is tragic, but it is, you're sort of. I was raised believing Mary is just basically some woman, and that, sorting, and things like, calling her the Theotokos, they definitely rubbed me the wrong way. I remember there's a old Christmas carol that was not old, it was actually new Christmas song that it's got a line in there. Mary, did you know? You kiss your little baby, you kiss the face of God. And as a Protestant, that was that's a little bit much for me. Even though it's a Protestant song, that Mary was the mother of God was tough for me. And on top of that, like a lot of the church traditions related to Theotokos are extra biblical. And so even though I'm not sola scriptura at this point, it's still a bit much for me to take all that in. But I eventually got over that, because at the end of the day, we're so far removed from these events, and it's very clear that people believed all of these things about the Theotokos. We're talking it's pretty much universal by the 2nd century that people believe she was virgin, ever virgin after Christ's birth. And her veneration, even in Revelations, there's a depiction of her with the 12 stars as a crown on her head. So the veneration of Mary is clearly a very, very early tradition in Christianity, and you have to come to a place where you look at this and go, well, I'm just like some guy here in the 21st century. This is very far. The religion that I'm following is very distant from me, my cultural context, my language, how I think, and these people knew better. And so I'm just going to take on faith that these people understood the religion that I'm practicing better than the religion that better than I do, which is, as a Protestant, where it takes a lot to go there, because you're sort of expected to have it all together, to be interpreting the scriptures yourself accurately, and to have your own opinions on these things. I think that in your average evangelical church, you're going to see a larger disparity in opinions and theological understandings than you will across entire like denominations of older versions of Christianity. Like I think throwing in some extra heresies there as well. Like even among like different heretical sects in ancient Christianity, you're going to find like more similarity than you will with in a single congregation in the evangelical church. You'll have people, you'll have some people that believe that Jesus was just sort of a good teacher and they're there for cultural reasons, you know, that sort of thing. Or yeah, I mean, all sorts of opinions. So once I understood that I was just as prone to that kind of thinking as anybody else, it gave me the ability to just sort of rest on to trust in the traditions and the historical interpretations of Christianity. So that's how I sort of came to that.
Okay. So just to summarize some of those challenges, there was the challenge of the icons, but it sounds like the argument that you used to overcome that was God has made all humans in his image, so there's not something inherently wrong with images because they are surrounding us, because we're surrounded by other people. And then it seems like it might be okay to have these images in front of us when we're praying to God.
God chose to incarnate and make a visible version of himself, reveal a visible version of himself to all of us. So, I mean, and even like if you want to go even more into this, I mean, God appears several times in the Old Testament. Even he wrestles with Jacob. It's the idea of a completely distant God that is not sort of visible, I think, is not really it's not. I don't think it's really Christian.
Yeah. Well, and also there's the reality that even in the Old Testament, they did bow down towards images, not in the same fashion as in the Orthodox Church per se, but they had the Ark of the Covenant with the cherubim over top of it, and there were pictures in the temple.
Cherubim are inhabitants of heaven, just like the saints.
Yes, exactly. So, and then with the veneration of Mary, it sounds like you came to a place where you trusted the authority of the Orthodox Church, or that you could cooperate with it. And it sounds like initially the way into that was encountering people that you found admirable in one way or another in the actual parish that you participated in.
That was what got me to stay. But with like the veneration of Mary, I think that for that was, like I said, that was probably the hardest thing to overcome. Just my initial trouble with that, and it really came from just sort of wholesale accepting the tradition as it is, rather than any sort of specific argument for this. Like so, like the Proto-Evangelion of James describes, I think, like a lot of the traditions that the Orthodox Church has about Mary are described in that. But like so there's a couple things from that you can sort of say. So it's not included in the Bible. So that's sort of, if you're going to give a mark against it, that's a mark against it. Okay, but you've got some other things. You got some certain claims. So in it. Mary is a temple weaver. Well, a temple weaver is a real thing. That's an important question. Turns out, yes, temple weavers were a real thing. One of the arguments is, okay, well, it was some of the other arguments for it are like, James is Jesus's brother, but on the cross, Christ tells Saint John that he's supposed to care for his mother after he ascends, and this would be very unusual, very offensive if James was Jesus's biological brother by Mary. So there's that, and that sort of leads a little bit. That's sort of some evidence towards it. I think as well, like one part of the claim is that, like, Mary and Elizabeth are cousins. So, the idea that Mary might have an important place in the church or not, I guess in the synagogue at that point, makes a lot of sense. Clearly from a family that has a priest in it. So there's a lot. These are sort of circumstantial evidence from the Bible that sort of support the story, but you sort of have to accept that this is the accepted understanding of Mary and the Theotokos's life through accepting tradition, in my view.
Yeah, and for those that may not be familiar, the Proto-Evangelion of James is this very old document that, as Emmanuel is saying, isn't included in the canon of Scripture, but within the Orthodox Church, it does have a very high place within tradition, and you can trace a lot of the things that the Orthodox believe about the Virgin Mary to this document. And I will also add that there's different ways of understanding it, and so you've got prominent figures like Father Thomas Hopko that would understand it in more of a symbolic way that's nevertheless true. You've got other people that would interpret it more in a literal fashion, but the reality either way is that it is very foundational for the doctrine and understanding of who Mary is.
And I think one of the other parts of this that's important is that with many of these early texts, it may not be accepted. So I think part of the a good reason why it may not be accepted is I think that I think that at the time they didn't really believe it was written by James. However, just because they didn't believe it was written by James doesn't mean that they didn't believe that the content of it was reflective of reality. That's those are actually two separate questions. Whether it is an authentic document as it claims to be, and whether it says things that are true. That were believed at the time. Those are actually separate things, and I think that helped me sort of understand why these traditions would exist, because the document is not necessarily the source. It may just be sort of an early reference to these things being the belief at the time.
Yes, yeah, there's a great parallel there with writings of someone like Pseudo Dionysius the Areopagite, who is, Dionysius the Areopagite comes up in Acts of the Apostles, and then you got these texts like from hundreds of years later that are nevertheless extraordinarily foundational in Orthodoxy, but they're written under the name of Dionysius the Areopagite. So you do have that example there as well. So why don't you bring us up to the present, because obviously you're no longer living in Calgary, so just talk us through that transition to where you are currently, and how maybe your Orthodox faith has changed, or any details that you'd like to fill us in on.
Yeah, well, we're living in the Republic of Georgia, so I think the selection of country may have been biased slightly by Orthodoxy. Okay, so what's happened? Okay, so I was baptized in Calgary, and I think part of the main. So we had sort of two reasons for it. First of all, because of my work. My work is political, and if you know anything about Canada and politics right now, it's not always it's not the. I didn't think it was the safest place to be, running when my living was based off of donations to right-wing causes. So that was certainly helped us get out the door. We also had a lot of concerns during COVID. And these are sort of the secular reasons why we sort of wanted to leave. So in October when we left literally right before they were closing the border for people to leave, unless you were vaccinated. And we weren't vaccinated, and my wife was. We had a child. We were hoping to have more kids, and we were worried about this genuinely. And so we thought, well, we don't know how long. Fortunately, the lockdowns did end, and those sorts of policies have been released. But when it was in the time, that's a pretty scary place to be. We don't know when we'll even be able to get out if we don't get out now. So that was definitely a good kick out the door. So we knew we wanted to go somewhere. Why we picked Georgia was, even though we had been Orthodox in Calgary, and I would our parish was great. And anyone who's in Calgary and considering it, go check out St. Peter's. It's a fantastic parish. You'll meet some really amazing people there. We also, we are most people in the parish are converts, and some of the people and during COVID, some of the people that we got very close to were sort of cradle Orthodox, and what we found was interesting was when we were facing these sorts of things, they have a completely different way of looking at things than converts into the faith. And we were learning a lot from these understandings, and so we thought, well, we thought we could probably learn a ton from actually going and living in an Orthodox country. And in Canada, you don't have I suppose you have a few, but I don't even know where they are, like saints' relics and that sort of thing. And every church has some saint relics underneath the altar, but there's just a lot of stuff in Georgia. It's just filled, like Saint Maximus the Confessor. He was exiled and died in Georgia. His tomb is here. We have the place where Christ's garment was buried is here in Georgia. Saint Nino, recent saints, Saint Gabriel. You throw a rock, you're going to hit an Orthodox sacred place in Georgia. It's amazing. So many martyrs, and so it's you're as an Orthodox Christian, you sort of are you are in the church of the saints, and so being able to venerate the relics of saints and sort of walk literally where the places where the saints were, it's a really powerful experience. Even in our city, there's a bridge where 100,000, the bridge of 100,000 martyrs, because of I believe it was a Tartar invasion, and they basically laid out a bunch of icons on the bridge and said, "You walk over the icons, or we chop your heads off and throw you into the river." And 100,000 people here in Georgia chose to have their heads chopped off and thrown into the river rather than walk on the icons. It's just an amazing place, and I think that and I've really loved being here. It's changed my faith dramatically. Our priest is ethnic Georgian, and I'd say the differences are he's much sterner than probably most priests you'll find in the West. I don't think, if I'm getting particularly specific, it's rare to be denied communion in a Western parish. Here, it happens. If you haven't kept the fast, he's going to say no communion this week. But also so they're sterner, but also I think very loving, and yeah, he's got 10 kids. He's an amazing man, and so that I really like that, and I think that it really has helped me to become more Orthodox, being able to just absorb what little I can through osmosis by being here. So that's it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that within Orthodoxy, there's a deep appreciation for not only what you're thinking, but how you're acting, what you're surrounding yourself with. And so you've taken that to the next level, as it were, by moving to a country that has a deep Orthodox history, that you're really immersing yourself in that culture. So I think that would make sense to a lot of people. Were there you mentioned some of the challenges initially that you faced when you were encountering the Orthodox Church in terms of how the theology was in contrast to the evangelicalism you were brought up with. Were there any other challenges that you faced along the way that you had to overcome?
Well, I think I mentioned I had never been to liturgy, a liturgy before. Services I was used to consisted of the rock band and the TED Talk. So, and actually the liturgy I rationalized for myself very early on. I said, well, I don't like the service anyways. So at least if they stick to the liturgy, they can't really mess it up the same way that you can in in a regular evangelical church. So that was my cope for overcoming the problems of the liturgy. See what else. I don't know. You were there for some of it. Do you remember anything that we had some of these conversations?
Yeah. I think more so I'd be curious, like sometimes you get into something and there's things that are immediately on the radar and you think, well, this is something I have to adjust to and overcome. And then sometimes there's other things that come up later in the journey, other challenges that you have to face. So, I mean, it sounds like it's been pretty smooth sailing since then, although I could be wrong about that. I wonder, maybe when you
It has
came
been
to
pretty smooth.
Georgia, it might have been a bit of a different setting. Like, I don't know if the liturgy is performed. I
It's
imagine
in
it's not
Georgia, and
in
that's a big
English.
change.
So there might be some cultural things that are different just between Canada and Georgia that are not directly associated with Orthodoxy, but have a connection with how things are done. I mean, you mentioned that the priest is a little bit sterner there, so you could even just compare and contrast how things are slightly different in Georgia versus your experience in Canada.
Okay, so yeah, I don't want to get anyone in trouble. So, I'll be honest. So in like, for example, in COVID in Canada, you know, even within the Orthodox Church, there was a lot of places that um, you know, they tried to work within the government regulations and this sort of thing. In Georgia, it's like the total opposite. Like, people didn't take it seriously. Oh, I mean, sorry. In secular culture, they did, but basically in the church, they said, you really can't step into the church. Like, the church in Georgia, I believe the patriarch, if I remember, here in Georgia, has something like 93% of people trust him. Okay, so the relative power in the country leans heavily on the church. Like, politicians, if they're lucky, if they're popular, they got like 50% of the people support them. The patriarch is like 93%. So when he says, so you really don't step on the church's toes here. That's very comforting. And I think coming from Canada, where I, you did sort of, especially for my line of work, worry about the government. The fact that the church was sort of apart from all that, and didn't need to worry about the government stepping in to its affairs, that was very comforting for me. And the church has a very, like, the attitude of the church here is you know um, they've had a lot of years, they've suffered a lot of persecutions throughout the centuries here in Georgia. Like, yes, I mentioned the 100,000 martyrs, communism. These people have been through so much, so they really don't give an inch when it comes to the faith, and they don't even you don't even consider giving an inch when it comes to faith. That's like, in terms of mental differences, like, the Georgians have been producing martyrs for a very long time, and the mentalities that you need to, like, not give an inch are deeply rooted here. And um, so that like, if I were to give, like, one of the biggest differences between Orthodox culture there, and I'm not even, like, necessarily in North America, you don't face that sort of persecution very often. um, you know and many people are very nice. There's a lot of impulse to, like, and some people have, like, genuine disagreements, and so you sort of want to conform and make everybody sort of happy and do that. And and I think even as Canadians, just sort of, you naturally, I don't want to, like, make it sound too good, but, like, you're naturally nice people, so you want people to feel comfortable and that sort of thing. And that sort of also bleeds into how you are, how your faith is. You view, if you're making people uncomfortable, like, this is definitely something, like, you think, well, am I, like, being a loving Christian because I'm making these people uncomfortable? And that's just not a mentality here. They're sort of, yeah. So that's a big contrast. I don't know. I think did I lose track of the question somewhere along the line?
No, I think that's really helpful for people listening, because I imagine that many aren't living in Georgia. Probably a decent amount of the audience is located in
That's
North
true enough.
America, and it is a different setting. And so it is always helpful to compare and contrast, because you learn a lot about your own culture that you grew up with by visiting another culture.
Yes.
And sometimes that visiting is in person. Sometimes people can't do that. So the next best thing is to talk to someone that is living there, and then you see
Mm-hmm.
your own setting in a new light. So I think that that's really valuable. So, I mean, are you guys planning to, maybe there isn't a definite plan at this point, but are you planning to, like, make Georgia your home, or what are your thoughts in terms of where you guys are going to land?
At this point, we've had lots of plans. We lived in Turkey for 4 months, unexpectedly. So the plans can change. We're at this point, we're open. It's very nice for us. It's not something that everyone can do, and I understand that. Our work is online, so I can pick up, go work from anywhere. I'm very fortunate to be to be in that situation. And so that also leaves the door open that if we're led somewhere else, that's where we'll go. I don't know. We definitely want to settle in an Orthodox country, but even, like, if I say, like, for Georgia, I think I might have mentioned this to you before. The war's going on in Ukraine right now, and so Georgia is this is affecting Georgia in lots of ways. We have lots of refugees from both from Ukraine and then Russia. It's so things are uncertain all over the world, and so I can't say anything with certainty.
Yeah, just see what the future holds, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And Emmanuel, would you have any advice for someone who is investigating the Orthodox Church? We have a number of people listening that are interested in Orthodoxy or exploring Orthodoxy. So if you could speak to them and give some advice, or even if you could go back in time and give yourself some advice when you were first encountering the Orthodox Church, what would that be?
Okay. Well, I think for myself, I think I just really wish I had. I think I just wish I had joined sooner. As I said, I think my conversion process was not particularly rocky. Really, you should be asking my wife. I think that she probably had a bit of a harder time than I did. But for people that are interested in the Orthodox Church, it's kind of tough because, like, everybody's different, and so I don't really know what could be said generally. But I think for myself, it would be join the Orthodox Church sooner, and I think that probably would apply to many people that are interested. I think that you should join, get in fast. I think Orthodoxy is exploding in the West, and I think that's because I think God is really gathering people to His church right now. And so, if you feel that you're being led, you should follow. I think that's probably the best advice I can give. I think that as I was alluding to earlier, I think the world's is a crazy place, and if you need a foundation, the Orthodox Church is the foundation you should build your life on, because it is a solid rock. It has been around. It is the religion of the apostles, and it is, and so you really can't get a more stable rock than the Orthodox Church to build your life around. So that would be my advice.
That's helpful. And you alluded to your wife having some more reservations than you did. And I think that's also a common thing that a lot of people go through if they're married or if they're dating someone. When they first go to an Orthodox church, they and their significant other might be on quite different pages. So, would
Yeah.
you have any practical advice in terms of navigating that, or how did you guys work through that together?
Well, um, my wife was in the same situation as me going in. We both knew we should be going to church. We weren't going to church, and we were both very impressed by the people at St. Peter. So that we shared that baseline. And in some ways, I think my wife had a harder time. Her parents are both missionaries in Africa. Like the evangelical, the how your sunk cost into Protestantism was much higher for her than it was for me. And so I think that is the stuff. And of course, I'm the one doing a lot of the reading. So while I may be able to find these sorts of things. Sorry, I know I'm like sweating. It's hot here. Another
No
big difference
problem.
from
No
Canada.
problem.
It's really hot.
Right.
So um, anyway, so anyway, I think that was harder for her. And I've noticed in general, I don't know. I think a lot of my friends, um, it's usually husbands slash boyfriends dragging their significant other to the church rather than the inverse. I haven't seen the inverse very often. So I think in general, a lot of the poor women they come unwillingly at first, and have to sort of adapt. So I don't know. For her, I think most of the same. I mean, we were both evangelical, so all of the theological issues were the same for both of us. Um, uh, I also benefited from her because, unlike me, who was quieter about some of these things, she was very outspoken. I remember in one catechism class, she asked Father Philip. She said, um, I think it was either catechism or young adults, and um, he said, any questions? He said, okay, yeah, I've got a question. How is saint veneration different from ancestor worship? Which is that was a funny question. And yeah, very grateful to the people that put up with those sorts of things in the church. But I benefited from her being able to ask us the questions, or yeah, we had to have a lot of conversations with uh, I don't want to dox anybody, but I guess it's fine. I want to call him Father Goosen, but he's not. He's a deacon right now.
Oh, yeah, Deacon John Goosen. Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah,
interviewed him
Deacon
on
Goosen.
the
Yeah,
podcast
he's
previously.
fantastic.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. So he's fantastic. He was. We asked him a lot of the questions about Mary, and he was very helpful. Yeah, I don't know. Ask people in the Orthodox Church that I've met and not just, and now I've been to Orthodox churches all over the world, um, even in Turkey. Every Orthodox church I've been to, there's some very impressive people, very pious people, very intelligent people in every parish I've been to. Seek them out, and they'll be able to help you. In my view, that's the fastest. They'll be able to help you and explain things to you, and I think that'll make any transition much easier for people.
Well, it's a great bit of practical advice to wrap up with today, Emmanuel. So I want to thank you for your time. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out that episode of the Orthodox Christian Podcast. If you have a question about Orthodox Christianity, there is a link to a Google form in the video description. If you haven't yet liked or subscribed a video, I would very much appreciate it if you did that. And also, if you know anyone that would benefit from watching this video, please pass it along to them. In the meantime, have a peaceful week. Take care.